was reviewing the final design for a penthouse project in Manhattan when my phone buzzed. Family meeting. Tonight. Urgent. No greeting. No signature. Just a command the same tone I grew up obeying. For a moment, I almost laughed. My family hadn't spoken to me in nearly 2 years. Not since my wedding, the one they skipped because in my mother's words it lacked class. That day, while I said my vows in a small chapel in Vermont, they were 2 states away, attending my sister Grace's charity gala. My father even posted a picture captioned, "Proud of our shining girl." I wasn't tagged. I didn't need to be. I used to think being ignored was the worst thing that could happen. I was wrong. It was being remembered only when useful. Now 2 years later, they suddenly remembered me right after the Times ran a feature titled, "The Woman Behind Manhattan's $5.5 million Modern Haven." Apparently, success has a stronger signal than blood. I looked at the message again, took a sip of espresso, and smiled. Urgent, they said. As if urgency meant anything to me now. Still, I typed back a simple reply, "See you at 8. Not because I owed them my presence, but because every storm deserves its witness. Growing up, I learned that in the Welles family, love was conditional, a currency earned, not given. My sister Grace mastered the trade early. All she had to do was smile, and my parents would orbit around her like planets to the sun. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the listener, the one who blended into wallpaper. When I brought home art projects, my mother would glance and say, "Sweet, but Grace won the debate trophy today." When I got accepted to the architecture program at Columbia, my father said, "Architecture. That's not a real career, Clara. It's a hobby with expensive paper." I stopped showing them my drawings after that. They taught me early that silence kept the peace. So I stayed silent through birthdays, forgotten holidays overshadowed, and years of being the responsible one, the reliable backup when Grace messed up. By the time I turned 25, I realized silence wasn't peace. It was permission. So I left. No dramatic goodbye. No speech about finding myself. Just a note on the kitchen counter and a packed car. I drove away before sunrise, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the strange relief of finally being unseen on my own terms. I started over in a rented basement apartment with 1 desk, 1 laptop, and a dream too small for them to notice. 3 years later, Welles Design Studio wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. But I didn't tell them. Because when you've been invisible your whole life, sometimes the sweetest revenge is letting them believe you still are. Their house hadn't changed, same white pillars, same manicured lawn that screamed perfection. Inside, the air smelled of old money and lavender polish. Clara, my mother's voice, carried the kind of false brightness that comes from guilt. Finally, you've been impossible to reach. "I've been busy," I said, simply hanging my coat. Grace appeared from the living room, flawless as ever, in a silk dress that probably cost what I once paid for rent. "Look who decided to show up," she said, smiling like it hurt. "I was invited," I said. We sat at the long dining table, mahogany, polished to reflection. My father cleared his throat. "Grace and Peter had some financial complications. Their business investment didn't pan out. We thought maybe—" "You thought I'd help," I finished. "It's family," Clara Grace said softly. "You owe us that much." I tilted my head. "Do I?" My mother placed her manicured hand over mine. "You've done so well for yourself, darling. We're proud. Truly. But your sister's situation is delicate." "Delicate," I repeated, savoring the word like a bitter drink. I took out my phone, opened a recent project file, and turned the screen toward them. A sprawling glass estate overlooking the Hudson. "That's mine," I said, fully paid. The silence that followed was almost holy. My father's jaw tightened. Grace's smile faltered. My mother blinked too many times. You didn't tell us, my father said finally. I met his gaze. You didn't ask. Inner felt like theater, and I wasn't sure if I was the audience or the villain. Grace tried to fill the air with small talk, but every compliment had an edge. So you're still doing interior design. That's cute. I always said you had a good eye. It's architecture, I corrected. And it's more than an eye. It's vision. My father sipped his wine and muttered, Vision doesn't pay bills. Responsibility does. Then maybe that's why you're in debt, I said without blinking. The table went still. My mother's fork clinked against her plate. Grace stared. I leaned back, calm, unbothered. You know I used to think success would make you proud. But I realize now it just makes you uncomfortable. Don't twist this, Clara, my mother said sharply. You've changed. You're cold. No, I said softly. I just stopped apologizing for existing. For a long time, no one spoke. Only the sound of the grandfather clock filled the room steady and cruel. Then Grace's voice cracked, always the performer. I made mistakes, okay? But can't we move past it? We're still family. I looked at her, really looked the desperation behind the gloss. Forgiveness, I said quietly, isn't a discount code you use when you're broke. Her face twisted. My father slammed his napkin on the table, furious. Enough. This attitude is called boundaries, I interrupted. You should try them. I stood. I'm not here for reconciliation. I'm here so you remember the woman you decided wasn't worth showing up for. And then I left the table. The next morning, my phone lit up with messages from Grace. I'm sorry, Clara. I didn't mean what I said. Please, can we talk? I need your help. Mom and Dad are worried. Worried, I thought, or embarrassed. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat on my terrace overlooking the city skyline, the skyline that once belonged to my dreams, now to my reality. The quiet hum of construction from a nearby site almost sounded like applause. By noon, an email arrived from a charity organization I supported, Women Rebuilding Futures. The director thanked me for my recent donation. The name of the recipient caught my eye, Emma Parker, Grace's former assistant, the one she fired after announcing her pregnancy. I smiled. Revenge didn't always need noise. Sometimes it just needed timing. Later that evening, I got another call, this time from my mother. Clara, sweetheart. She began, her tone sugar-coated. We know you've been successful. Maybe you could guide your sister, offer advice. I already did, I said, indirectly. She hesitated. What do you mean? Let's just say the universe is finally balancing its books. Before she could respond, I ended the call. That night I went for a walk along the river. The city lights shimmered like distant ghosts. I realized then revenge wasn't about making them suffer. It was about making sure their voices no longer dictated mine. I'd spent years trying to earn their approval. Now the only validation I needed was the reflection in the water, steady, composed, and finally free. They had built their kingdom on appearances. I built mine on silence. And silence, when you own it, is the loudest sound in the world. 2 weeks later, I received a handwritten letter. Elegant paper, perfect cursive. My mother's handwriting. Family meeting, this Saturday. Please, Clara, don't make this harder than it already is. I almost laughed. The same words she once said when I begged her to come to my wedding. Still I went, not for them but for closure. The house looked smaller this time, as if its arrogance had deflated. Inside, they were all waiting. My father sat stiffly at the head of the table, Grace beside him, her husband looking anywhere but at me. Clara. My father began, voice calm but forced. We've all said things we regret. Let's put this behind us. Family should stay united. I smiled faintly. Unity isn't built on silence, Dad. It's built on respect. And we've never had that. Grace leaned forward. We're not asking for much. Just help us get through this. You can afford it. I said, meeting her eyes. But I won't. My father's jaw clenched. You're being cruel. No, I said softly. I'm being consistent. You taught me how. I reached into my bag and placed an envelope on the table, a legal document. This is a cease and desist order. It prevents you from using my company's name, projects, or connections in any of your proposals. Consider this my final boundary. My mother's voice trembled. Clara, you do this to your own family. I stood. You did it first when you chose appearances over me. I just learned your language. Then I looked at Grace. Her face pale, her eyes glassy. You called my wedding ordinary. So I built a life that's extraordinary without you in it, and I left. No raised voices, no dramatic ending, just quiet finality, and heels echoing against marble, like punctuation marks on a story that was finally mine. A year later, the city feels different, not softer, just quieter. I live in a glass townhouse overlooking the river. The mornings smell of coffee and clean air. I design homes now for people who understand that beauty means peace, not prestige. Sometimes I pass by families on the street, parents holding their children's hands, laughing without performance. It still stings, but less each time. One afternoon, a letter arrived at my office, from Grace. I'm sorry. I was jealous and I took it out on you. I wish things were different. There was no request for money, no manipulation. Just that. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some apologies don't need answers, just distance. That evening, I walked by the Hudson, my reflection framed by the lights of the skyline I'd once dreamed of. I thought of the girl who left home with nothing but a notebook and a plan, and I smiled. They used to say I was invisible. Now I understand invisibility isn't weakness. It's freedom. Because the most powerful revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's living a life they'll never be invited to witness again. Success didn't heal me. Peace did. For a long time, I mistook silence for surrender. Now I know it's strategy. The kind of silence that builds empires, writes stories, and rewires pain into purpose. Sometimes at night, I sit on the balcony and reread the first blueprint I ever drew, a small house. Nothing special. But in the corner in my old handwriting are the words I'd written at 19. Make something that outlasts noise. I did. The Welles name still circulates in charity galas and business circles. But mine stands alone, no longer attached, no longer dependent. Last Christmas I mailed them a single card. No photo, no signature, just one line centered and gold embossed. I wish you peace, the kind I paid for. I didn't send it for closure. I sent it as proof that even after everything I could wish them well from a distance because I no longer needed their approval to feel whole, and that I've realized is the real price of peace. It costs every version of you that begged to be understood. Now when I look in the mirror, I don't see the invisible daughter anymore. I see the architect not just of buildings, but of her own freedom, and she finally built something unbreakable.